Hello and welcome to my video all about how to add tassels to your knitting. You'll usually find this technique used on the ends of scarves or blankets. I'm going to show you two different methods. The first uses a crochet hook and the second uses a scrap piece of strong thread. The crochet hook you'll need for the first method needs to be an appropriate size for the yarn you're using. You can see that I'm using a super bulky yarn and therefore I'm using quite a chunky crochet hook. You will also need some kind of object, container or even piece of scrap cardboard that will help you to cut the strands of yarn that are going to be used for the tassels. Each tassel consists of several strands of yarn that are all equal size. You can cut these strands individually, but obviously that takes a lot of time. And it's much easier and much quicker to cut all the lengths of yarn at the same time. The yarn will be wrapped around the object to make the strands for the tassels. So obviously the length of the tassel strands will equal the circumference of the object you use. And therefore the length of the resulting tassel will be about half the circumference of the object. So you just need to pick an object or container with that in mind, or cut a piece of cardboard to the correct size. So to begin, you just take the end of the yarn that you want to use for the tassels and tie it around the piece of card or the container you're using. And then you continue to wrap the yarn around that container or piece of card, trying not to overlap the yarn too much as you do so. The number of times you wrap the yarn around the container equals the number of strands of yarn that you will create. I'm going to be adding 4 tassels to my scarf, each made up of 5 strands of yarn. So therefore I need to wrap the yarn at least 20 times around the container. Just bear in mind that the thicker you want the tassels, the more yarn strands you'll want in each tassel. You can always make more strands later, so don't worry too much about making enough now. You then take some scissors and cut the yarn down one side to produce strands of the same length. Remember to cut off the knot that you made at the beginning of the yarn. Then split the yarn into 5 strand bunches, or however many strands you want in each tassel. Originally I was going to put 7 strands in each tassel, but I realised that was too chunky, so I reduced the number to 5 strands per tassel. You line up the strands and pick them up in the centre to fold the bunch of strands in half to make a loop. You then take your crochet hook through the middle of a loop in your knitting, close to the edge but not too close. You want at least 2 strands of yarn between the edge of your knitting and where you push the crochet hook through. Make sure to push the crochet hook from the back of the knitting to the front. And then you catch the centre of the bunch of yarn with the hook and pull the yarn strands back through the knitting. You then put your fingers through the loop, like so, and grab the yarn ends. Then you pull the yarn ends through the loop and tighten. As you can see, the knot at the back of the knitting looks like this, with a line down the centre, whilst at the front, the knot is smoother and neater. So I'm just going to repeat that again. So I'm going to take 5 strands and line them up. Fold them in half to form a loop. Take the crochet hook from the back to the front of the knitting. Hook the loop of yarn strands onto the crochet hook. And then pull those strands partly through the knitting. And then take my fingers through the loop, hold on to the yarn ends and pull them through the loop, and tighten. And now I've added the second tassel. Make sure that when you're adding the second tassel and beyond, that you plan where you're going to put the tassels along the knitted edge, so that you can make sure those tassels are spaced out evenly. Okay, so now I'm going to show you another method for adding tassels. This time I'm going to show you on a different project I did, which was a blue scarf, and I'm going to have 6 strands of yarn in each tassel. What you will need for this method is exactly the same as before, but instead of a crochet hook, you'll need a piece of strong thread and a yarn needle. You can get plastic or metal yarn needles, and I would definitely recommend a plastic yarn needle because they're bigger and more blunt, therefore less likely to split the yarn when you're taking it through your knitting. To do this method, you simply lay the tassel strands on top of the piece of thread, so that the thread lies across the centre of them. You then pick up the ends of this thread and feed them through the eye of the yarn needle. You then take the yarn needle through the knitting, this time from the front to the back. And this pulls the yarn strands through your knitting. Then you remove the thread and the needle. Take your fingers through the loop, grab onto the yarn ends and pull them through the loop and tighten. And there you go, you've made a tassel. So I'll show you that again. You lay the yarn strands over the piece of thread, so the thread lies across the centre of them. You pick up the thread ends and feed them through the yarn needle. You then take the yarn needle front to back through the knitting, remove the thread and needle, take your fingers through the loop that's been pulled through the knitting, grab onto the yarn ends, pull them through and tighten. And that's the second method of making a yarn tassel. I hope this video has been helpful to you, and thank you very much for watching.